You hear it before you see it. A low rumble moves through the ground beneath your feet. The trees at the edge of the clearing go still. Then, the birds stop, all of them at once. Your body does not wait for your brain to decide what to do. Your heart rate doubles in less than a second. Your pupils dilate, blood floods your legs, your vision narrows to a tunnel pointed straight at the source of that sound. You are not panicking. You are doing exactly what 300,000 years of evolution designed you to do. Fear is the oldest technology your ancestors had. And for most of human history, it was the difference between passing on your genes or becoming something else's meal. But what exactly did ancient humans fear? Not in the vague, general sense. What specific threats made the hair on the back of your ancestors' necks stand up? What kept them from sleeping? What shaped the way they moved, hunted, chose where to live, and who to trust? The answers are stranger, more specific, and more familiar than you probably expect. Start with the most obvious one: predators. For most of human prehistory, your ancestors were not at the top of the food chain. This is something people often forget. Homo sapiens only became dominant predators relatively recently in evolutionary terms. For hundreds of thousands of years before that, your ancestors were prey. In 1995, archaeologist C.K. Brain published findings from Swartkrans Cave in South Africa showing that early hominins, your distant relatives, had their skulls punctured by leopard fangs. The spacing of the puncture marks matched leopard teeth exactly. These were not scavengers picking over bones. These were active kills. Your ancestor was carried up into a tree to be eaten. So yes, leopards, lions, hyenas, cave bears, saber-toothed cats in earlier epochs. These were not abstract threats. They were real, specific, and terrifying, and your body still carries the proof. Research by evolutionary psychologist Arne Öhman at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden found that modern humans detect snakes and spiders faster than any other visual stimulus, even when those images are shown for less than a tenth of a second, too fast for conscious recognition. Your brain has a dedicated fast-track alert system for these animals. It bypasses your reasoning entirely and fires straight into your threat response. You did not learn to fear snakes. You were born preloaded with that alarm. The same is true of heights, of enclosed spaces, of sudden darkness. These are not irrational phobias. They are your ancestors' most useful survival instincts running in a world those instincts were not designed for. But predators were only the beginning. There is something your ancestors feared even more than being eaten. Something that statistically killed far more of them. Something invisible, silent, and completely merciless. Other people. This sounds cynical, but the archaeological record is clear. Violence between human groups is ancient. It did not begin with civilization or agriculture or territorial states. It was already here. At a site called Nataruk in Kenya, researchers led by Marta Mirazan-Lar at Cambridge University discovered the remains of 27 individuals who died approximately 10,000 years ago. They were not buried. They were left where they fell. Skeletons showed blunt force trauma to skulls, arrow points embedded in bones, hands bound at the wrists. One woman was pregnant. This was a massacre, not a battle between armies. It was a group of people who encountered another group and did not survive. Nataruk is not unique. Sites across Europe, the Americas, and the Middle East show the same pattern. Perimortem fractures, injuries that happened at or just before death, on skulls, ribs, and long bones. Evidence of raids, ambushes, and massacres going back tens of thousands of years. Your ancestors feared strangers. Deeply. Instinctively. Immediately. Research by neuroscientist David Amodio at New York University found that the human brain categorizes faces as in-group or out-group within milliseconds of seeing them. That categorization triggers a threat response for out-group faces that does not fire for familiar faces. This is not racism. This is an ancient survival system. For most of human prehistory, a stranger really was a potential threat. Groups competed for the same water sources, the same hunting grounds, the same shelter sites. Meeting someone you did not recognize could end your life. Your brain built an alarm for exactly that situation. You still carry it. Now here is where it gets complicated. Your ancestors feared strangers, but they also feared something that lived much closer, something that did not come from outside the group. They feared the dark. Not darkness as a concept. The actual specific dark of a moonless night in the open, away from fire, in a landscape where predators hunted by sound and smell and heat signature rather than sight. Modern humans living in industrialized environments have almost no frame of reference for this kind of darkness. There are no truly dark places left. Light pollution reaches into almost every corner of the planet, but for your ancestors, true darkness was a nightly reality, and it was genuinely dangerous. Leopards are nocturnal. So are lions in many circumstances. Hyenas hunt overwhelmingly at night. Without fire, your ancestor in the dark was blind while everything hunting them could still see, smell, and hear perfectly. This is why fire changed everything. Anthropologist Richard Wrangham at Harvard University has argued that the control of fire was perhaps the single most transformative event in human evolutionary history, more important even than tool use. Fire provided warmth. It changed what humans could eat by enabling cooking, but one of its most crucial early functions was simply keeping the dark away. Around a fire, you could see. You could see predators approaching before they reached you. You could maintain eye contact with your group. You could recognize faces. Fire turned the terrifying dark into something manageable. And yet the fear remained, because fire could go out. Imagine your ancestors sitting around a fire at night, somewhere in the African savanna 200,000 years ago. They know, not consciously but deeply in the part of the brain that does not use language, that the ring of firelight is the boundary of their safety. Everything inside that ring is known. Everything outside it is not. That line between light and dark was not just physical, it was psychological. It was the line between the world they could control and the world they could not. And this brings us to the third great fear, the one that no tool, no fire, no group could fully protect against. Death itself, and more specifically the death of the people they loved. For a long time, researchers assumed that prehistoric humans did not have sophisticated emotional responses to death. That burial was a relatively recent development, a sign of abstract thinking that came late in our evolution. The evidence has demolished that assumption. At Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq, paleoanthropologist Ralph Selecki excavated a Neanderthal burial site where the body appeared to have been laid on a bed of wildflowers. Later analysis complicated that interpretation. Rodent burrowing may have disturbed the pollen evidence, but what remained undisputed was that the individual had been intentionally buried. Intentional burial requires a concept of death. It requires caring about what happens to a body after the person inside it is gone. At Sungir, a site in Russia dating to roughly 34,000 years ago, researchers found two individuals, an adult man and two adolescents, buried with extraordinary care. Their clothing was covered in thousands of mammoth ivory beads, each one hand-carved. The process of making that clothing would have taken thousands of hours. These were not random objects. They were made specifically for the dead by people who felt something so powerful about those deaths that they devoted enormous time and labor to marking them. That is grief. That is love surviving the person it was directed at. And behind grief is fear. The fear of losing someone. The fear that the people who keep you safe and fed and warm might one day not be there. For ancient humans, that fear was not abstract. Losing a skilled hunter could mean starvation. Losing the person who knew where the water source was could mean death by thirst in 3 days. Losing a mother meant a child's survival odds collapsed. The people around you were not just emotionally important. They were literally keeping you alive. So your ancestors developed something that softened this fear, something that also eventually frightened them in its own right. They developed belief, the wildflower burial, the ivory beads, the cave paintings of animals at Lascaux and Altamira, painted deep inside cave systems where no one lived, in places so difficult to reach that accessing them required crawling through tunnels in complete darkness. These are not purely functional acts. They point towards something your ancestors believed about the world that could not be seen. Anthropologists call this evidence of symbolic thinking. But what it really suggests is that ancient humans were grappling with questions that have no physical answer. What happens after death? Why does the hunt fail? Why does the child not recover? Why does the river flood and take the camp? The world was full of things that happened for reasons your ancestors could not identify. And that uncertainty, not knowing why something bad happened, not knowing if something worse was coming, may have been the deepest fear of all. Because you can prepare for a predator. You can avoid strangers. You can stay near the fire, but you cannot prepare for something you cannot see, predict, or understand. Researchers studying the origins of religion, including Pascal Boyer at Washington University in St. Louis, have argued that belief in invisible agents, spirits, ancestors, forces that could influence the world, emerged partly as a response to this problem. If bad things happen for reasons, those reasons can potentially be influenced. You can appease, pray, perform, sacrifice. That is infinitely less terrifying than bad things happening for no reason at all. The fears your ancestors lived with were not so different from the fears you carry now. You still flinch at sudden movement. You still feel uneasy in real darkness. You still read strangers' faces the moment you meet them, running a threat assessment so fast you are not aware you are doing it. You still grieve in ways that feel physically painful because the ancient parts of your brain process social loss the same way they process physical injury. And somewhere in the quiet moments before sleep, you still feel the edges of that oldest uncertainty. The sense that the world is larger and more unpredictable than anything you can fully control or understand. You wake up in your warm house, in your lit room, with your phone and your locks and your calendar full of plans, and still, sometimes, in the dark, something moves. And for just a moment, before your rational brain catches up, you are exactly who you always were. Someone who survived because they were afraid of exactly the right things.